I'm not sure when exactly my family started seeing me as the expendable one. Maybe it was the year I moved overseas to chase a startup dream instead of joining the family real estate business. Maybe it was earlier, when I chose computer science over finance and didn't wear a blazer to dinner. Either way, by the time I came back to New York last fall, the message was clear. I was the outsider. My name's Madeline Park. I'm 36, and for the last decade, I lived in Berlin building out a small but solid AI logistics firm. After selling my shares in a private deal, I came back stateside to regroup. Burnt out, single, and tired. I didn't want a parade, just a quiet place to land. My older brothers, Andrew and Scott, had turned our childhood brownstone in Brooklyn into a boutique rental building. They offered to let me stay as long as I needed, while I figured out my next steps. Sounded generous enough, but when I arrived with 2 suitcases and jet lag so thick I could barely stand, they led me past the sleek glass-doored units on the lower floors, straight up to the attic. I know it's not ideal, Andrew said, flicking the attic light on with a wince. But hey, it's just for a few nights. The place was freezing. The ceiling sloped so low I had to duck walking in. No heat. A cot? A portable fan with one broken blade. And a faint, unmistakable scent of mildew that made my chest tighten. I laughed at first. Thought it was a joke. But Scott just said, "Look, we've got high-paying tenants downstairs. Units A through C are booked through the holidays, and D's housing a guy from Blackstone. We figured you'd understand." Of course I understood. I always understood. The attic was free. I was free. I slept that first night fully clothed, curled under a paper-thin blanket, watching my breath fog in the cold air like a ghost. My joints ached. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I heard them clinking espresso cups with their wives in the polished kitchen on the second floor, laughing about how Berlin had made me soft and how tech folks always think they're saving the world but can't even pay rent. I should have walked out. But instead, I stayed. For some reason, I needed to sit in it. I needed to feel just how invisible I'd become to them. They had no clue what I'd done in Berlin. No idea I'd exited my company quietly for 7 figures. They never asked. All they knew was that I did something with code and ran off to Europe. So they treated me like I was still 23 and job hopping. I told myself I'd stay a week, rest, recalibrate. But on day 3, I overheard something that shifted everything. They were in the dining room, doors wide open, unaware I was on the landing upstairs. Scott was complaining about a new investor pulling out of their expansion plans. Andrew said, "We might have to sell a piece of the building. We just need to make it look attractive on paper for now." Then Scott, laughing, added, "Honestly, I wouldn't even tell Maddie. She'd probably write us a Python script and call it a day." It wasn't just what they said. It was how they said it. Like I was some helpless joke floating in their orbit. Like I hadn't built anything, hadn't sacrificed, hadn't won. I went back upstairs, sat on that creaky cot, and stared at the water stain on the ceiling. My fists were clenched. I wasn't angry. I was done. That night, I took out my laptop, logged into my investment accounts, called an old partner in Berlin, emailed a real estate contact in Manhattan, and then I asked a question I hadn't dared to ask before. What would it take to buy this building? Quietly. My contact replied an hour later. "You're serious?" I typed back. "Dead serious. Let's talk numbers." I don't think it hit me how far removed I'd become from my own family until the 3rd day, when I came downstairs to grab coffee and heard them laughing about my post-startup unemployment era. Andrew was wiping down the espresso machine like it was a Ferrari. "You know she's just floating," he said. "Burned out or broke? Probably both." Scott leaned against the counter, holding his green juice. "I give it 2 weeks before she asks to borrow money. That attic's not so bad if you've got nothing to lose." I froze in the stairwell, hidden by the half wall, still in my hoodie from Berlin. I hadn't brushed my hair. I hadn't slept. And now I knew why. It wasn't just a bad first impression or a poorly thought-out guest setup. It was intentional. They wanted me small, They needed me insignificant. My success would force them to reckon with the fact that they had mocked and excluded someone who quietly outran them years ago. I walked in mid-conversation and they immediately shut up, the way people do when they've been caught saying something ugly but still think they're right. Scott smiled that too wide smile and said, "Morning, Mads. Still figuring out what you want to do next?" I poured my coffee in silence. I could feel something heavy settle inside me. Not rage exactly, but something colder, steadier, like concrete setting under my skin. That night, I started going through the building's public records, and I found something they never thought I'd bother to check. The property was heavily leveraged. They were trying to refinance the mortgage for the third time. A silent partner had just pulled out, which meant their expansion project, the one they kept bragging about over drinks, was teetering. They weren't thriving. They were treading water and dressing it up like a yacht party. It made what happened next hurt even more. The following afternoon, I came downstairs to grab a document I'd left in the lobby mailbox. When I walked in, Scott and Andrew were giving a tour of the property to a couple dressed like they'd walked out of a Wall Street magazine. The guy was asking about layout flexibility, high ceilings, access to the rooftop. Scott turned to him and said, without even blinking, "Yeah, the attic's just some dead space. We'll probably gut it and add an open concept loft. Maybe make it a meditation room or something." The woman asked, "And no one's using it now?" Andrew smiled. "Nope, just storage." I was standing 10 feet away. 10 feet. Neither of them even acknowledged me. Not a glance, not a joke, not a "just kidding, our sister's up there." Nothing. I wasn't a person. I was a placeholder they'd conveniently erased. I walked out without saying a word, my legs moving on muscle memory alone. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't go anywhere near them. Instead, I walked 5 blocks to the nearest cafe, ordered a black coffee I didn't even drink, opened my laptop, and called up the private investment firm that still owed me a favor from Berlin. I told them I had a building I wanted to acquire under an LLC, quietly, cleanly, quickly. I told them I wanted every offer to come through a third party, and I wanted a clause that would allow current managers to stay on only if approved by the new majority shareholder. Then I offered to put up the capital myself. They paused. "Madeline, you're serious?" I nodded. Dead serious. And right then, as if life was actively trying to test me, my phone buzzed with a message from Scott. "Hey, can you make yourself scarce for a couple hours? We've got a showing and the attic's not presentation ready. Appreciate it." No, please. No thanks. Just a command. From the guy who once cried in my arms when he failed out of undergrad, and I stayed up all night helping him write his makeup essay. I stared at that text like it was written in another language. And then I smiled. For the first time in days, because if they wanted me out of the attic, they were about to get their wish. The thing about betrayal, real betrayal, is that it doesn't explode. It seeps. It seeps into every quiet moment until even your silence feels contaminated. By the end of the week, I couldn't sit still. I couldn't write, couldn't read. I kept replaying Scott's text. "Make yourself scarce." Like it was some kind of eviction notice. Like I hadn't spent my 20s helping him stay afloat while I lived off instant noodles and Red Bull. I was spiraling, and I knew it. So I did what I always do when I need to get back in control. I gathered data. I spent the next 48 hours digging into everything. Title history, liens, permit filings, tenant contracts. They'd tried to make the building look like a boutique success, but under the hood, it was bleeding. They were 3 months behind on one commercial tenant's payments. Their loan extension had been denied by the bank. And worst of all, the co-op they'd been bragging about turning into a family investment vehicle was already 62% owned by outside investors, none of whom were told that the building's largest potential buyer was now me. I'd set up an anonymous LLC with the help of my Berlin contacts. The firm acted as the front. My name? Nowhere on the paperwork. All official communications ran through my lawyer, a stoic woman named Nisha who never blinked at anything. until I asked her to include a clause granting full decision-making power to the majority shareholder within 30 days of closing. "You planning something?" she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The first offer went out on Monday morning. Above market value, no contingencies. All cash. The kind of number desperate people can't ignore. By noon, Andrew called a family meeting over Chinese takeout in the second-floor kitchen. It felt staged, like they'd both decided to wear their softest expressions and act like I hadn't been living in a glorified crawlspace for the past 10 days. Andrew slid a dumpling container my way. "So listen, we've been getting feelers from investors. There's some interest in the building. We might explore options." "Might?" I raised an eyebrow. Scott chimed in. "Yeah, just preliminary. You know, casual inquiries, people sniffing around." I nodded slowly, sipping my tea. "Anyone specific?" They glanced at each other, clearly unsure how much I knew. "Some hedge fund types," Andrew muttered. "A couple of foreign firms." "Foreign firms. Cute." I didn't say a word. I just leaned back, let them think I was out of the loop, let them talk circles around me like always. But inside? I was already moving. The second offer went out Wednesday. Even higher. Still anonymous. Still quiet. By Thursday, they were rattled. I could hear Scott on the phone late that night, pacing outside the building, saying things like, "We can't lose controlling interest," and "What if they force us out?" His voice cracked. He sounded like someone finally realizing the floor wasn't as solid as he thought. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. I felt empty, exhausted. Because the truth is, I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted them to see me, to respect me, hell, to acknowledge me. Instead, they were scrambling for cash, calling in favors, emailing lawyers they hadn't spoken to in years. Then came Friday. I came home from a walk to find a woman in a navy pantsuit waiting outside the building. Clipboard, leather briefcase, heels too clean for Brooklyn sidewalks. "You must be Madeline," she said with a tight smile. "I am." "I'm with Kreslin Partners. We're representing the buyer in the acquisition of this property. Your brothers mentioned you were staying upstairs?" I blinked. "Kreslin?" She nodded. "Yes. We're the firm who made the second offer. The one they just accepted this morning." I stared at her. "They accepted?" They did. Signatures were finalized an hour ago. Deal closes in 30 days. You'll be notified formally through your registered mailing address. I stood there in the cold, heart pounding. "They didn't even tell me," I whispered. She tilted her head just slightly. "Well, they didn't know." I frowned. "Didn't know what?" She smiled, just enough for it to sting. "That the person they were selling to is you." There's a weird kind of silence that happens when the power shifts. Not the loud, triumphant kind you see in movies, but the stillness, like everyone's waiting for someone else to speak first, to confirm what just happened. That was the silence in our kitchen Friday night, when Andrew read the contract over dumplings that had long gone cold. Scott had gone pale. "You're the buyer?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I just looked at both of them and said, "You wanted out. I gave you a way out." "But why wouldn't you just talk to us?" Andrew asked, his voice brittle. "We're family. Family. The same family that stuffed me in an attic like I was an afterthought. The same brothers who erased me in front of investors. The same guys who made jokes about me not having a real job while I was quietly funding their escape plan." "I tried talking," I said. "For years. You just never listened." They both started speaking at once, panic behind the words, bargaining in their tone. I let them talk. I'd already won the part that mattered. But what they didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that I wasn't just buying the building. I was rewriting the rules. The next morning, I called Nisha. "I want a special clause added. I told her. Okay. If the current property managers failed to notify any residents of material ownership changes within 48 hours of closing, their right to renew any co-op board voting seats is voided. She paused. That's surgical. Just make it legal, I said. Then I walked to a little diner on the corner, ordered eggs over medium, and printed off the revised agreement for my records. By Monday, the calls started. Andrew. Hey, about the buyout. Maybe we rushed into it. Would you consider keeping us on as managing partners? Scott. I have a few pitch decks. Maybe we expand together. Make this a real brand. Even their wives texted me, suddenly full of warmth. So proud of you, Mads. I replied to none of it. Instead, I scheduled a private meeting with the current tenants. Just the residential ones. I brought coffee, pastries, even had name tags printed. At first, they were confused. By the end of the hour, they knew everything. Who really bought the building? Who had been mismanaging their rent increases? Who had ignored maintenance requests? Who had illegally raised co-op fees? Their silence wasn't like my brother's. It was loud with recognition. A few of them clapped. One older woman cried. I knew it, she said. You always smiled in the hallway. They never even looked at us. That hit me harder than I expected. I told them my plans. Stabilize rents, invest in actual repairs, add a shared rooftop garden instead of Scott's Zen meditation loft no one asked for. Then I posted an anonymous survey asking every tenant what they'd change if they had a say. And I meant it. That same afternoon, Andrew and Scott sent me an invite to an emergency board strategy session. I showed up late, intentionally. They were already in the lounge, suits on, whiteboard filled with color-coded plans labeled Phase 2 expansion and new capital channels. I didn't sit. I didn't even take off my coat. Gentlemen, I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. You've both been removed from the board, effective immediately. Scott laughed, until he realized I wasn't joking. You can't do that. I looked at him flatly. You didn't inform the tenants of the ownership change? That violates Section 8A.3 of your own operating agreement. Andrew snatched the paper. His hands trembled. But that's not how family does things, he muttered. No, I agreed. That's how business does things. You treated me like a footnote. I just made myself the headline. They were speechless, but I wasn't done. I pulled out a second folder. Also, your co-op voting rights are now void. You'll retain your equity from the sale, but your authority in building affairs ends now. Permanently. Andrew stood. You're overplaying your hand. I finally smiled. Number, I'm finally playing it. Then I turned to leave. But just before I reached the door, Scott mumbled something I almost missed. Wait, you're not keeping the name, are you? I turned around, looked him dead in the eyes. The building's already been renamed, I said. You'll see the sign go up tomorrow. What is it? Andrew asked, voice tight. The attic. They changed the locks the next day. Not me. Them. Andrew and Scott. Out of spite, maybe. Or pride. Or just plain denial. They somehow convinced themselves that I was bluffing, that I wouldn't follow through, that maybe if they acted fast enough, they could freeze me out of my own building. Didn't work. Nisha served the cease and desist that same morning, with photos, timestamps, and 3 separate legal violations. By noon, they had 24 hours to vacate or face breach of contract lawsuits they couldn't afford. I didn't want it to come to that. But if they were going to lock doors, I was ready to burn them off their hinges. They left the next night. No goodbye, no calls. Just 2 moving trucks and a lot of yelling I didn't bother to eavesdrop on. I stood on the fire escape just above street level, watching it all happen. Cold wind in my face. Coffee in my hand. 10 years of swallowed pride behind my teeth. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release. The new sign went up 2 days later. The attic. Custom steel lettering, matte black, minimal, elegant. Clean. The way I wanted things to feel again. I turned the top floor, once my moldy little exile corner, into a glass-walled studio with a reading nook, a writing desk, and a rooftop view that stretched across the East River. Tenants started calling me Miss Park, half-jokingly, then Maddie when they realized I wasn't here to be anyone's landlord tyrant. I hosted monthly forums, started a building newsletter. I even hired the guy who ran the corner bodega's late-night deliveries to help manage repairs, because he was reliable and treated people with respect, something my brothers never mastered. A few weeks later, I got a letter, handwritten, from my father. We hadn't talked in 2 years. He said he heard rumors about the building, said the boys were feeling betrayed and maybe blindsided. Then he wrote something that froze me cold. You didn't need to humiliate them just to prove a point. Family sticks together. I sat with that sentence for a long time, because I realized that's how they'd always framed it. Me as the one who left. Me as the disappointment. Never once questioning why I left, or what they did that pushed me so far out I had to buy the building just to be heard in it. I didn't reply, but I scanned the letter, added it to a folder labeled Perspective, and closed it without another thought. 2 months later, the news broke. Turns out Andrew had falsified multiple contractor invoices while managing the building. He'd skimmed off repair budgets, misreported taxable income, and used tenant escrow funds to float his personal renovation project in Long Island. The forensic audit I triggered during the transition caught every line. He lost his real estate license. Publicly. Scott wasn't charged, but his name was all over the reports. No more family investment consulting. No more investor dinners. Just silence. And me? I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I got up the next morning, watered my plants, and went back to work. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't surviving off spite. I was just living. A few weeks ago, a young woman moved into Unit 3B, 24, just out of college. First job in design. She sent me a thank you note for approving her application. I hope one day I can do what you do, she wrote. I almost cried. Not because of the praise, because of the possibility. That's all I ever wanted. Not a throne, not power, just space to be respected, to build, to exist. Looking back now, I don't regret the attic. I don't even regret the silence. Because it taught me one thing I'll never unlearn. Sometimes the people closest to you will shrink you to fit the version of you they're most comfortable with. And sometimes, the only way to grow is to outgrow them completely. If you've ever had to fight to be seen in your own family, or been told you were too much just for taking up space, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments if you feel ready. And if you want to hear more stories like this, from people who've rebuilt after being written off, you're always welcome here. We saved you a seat. It's not on the patio. It's at the top.